Do you remember that last week we started to tell you the story of two good friends, William and Beth, who set out to seek their fortunes? Last time we heard the story of William, who was a happy and helpful sort of fellow, and the best cake baker in the whole world. His other attribute was that he was a bit silly, but that's okay because he married Tricia, and Tricia was a bit silly too. This week I'm going to tell you the story of Beth. Unlike William, Beth was very clever. She knew how to do all sorts of important things, like how to solve problems and how to grow food to eat. Shortly after she left William to seek her fortune, Beth proceeded to marry a good man and had one son named Daniel. Unfortunately, Beth's husband died, and so Beth and Daniel had to make their own way in the world. They lived in a safe, warm house, but they needed to grow their own food to survive. Luckily, Beth knew how to grow food and consequently was able to assess the situation and figure out just what they needed. They needed a plow to break up the soil in their field and a horse to pull the plow. Then they'd be able to plant the seeds they had in their basement. Now Beth knew that there was someone who had a plow and a horse, but to get them she would have to be very clever. But that's okay because Beth was very clever indeed. I'm sure you want to know why I say Beth would need to be very clever to get her plow and her horse. That's because Beth's neighbor, a rich landowner, owned those things, and a more greedy and rigid man you never have met. He was also very cunning, very smart. And not only that, but the landowner wanted to make Beth his new wife. Now Daniel had deduced his mother's plan and told her not to go. Ceaseless mother, I do not trust that man. He will trick you. Beth knew it was inevitable, though. They had no other way to get the supplies they needed. She must approach the landowner. She assured Daniel that she would be just more clever and cunning than the landowner. The next day, Beth traveled to the home of the landowner and knocked at his door. When he saw Beth, the landowner smiled and thought to himself, "Ah, what has brought my clever neighbor Beth to my door? I bet she needs something from me. That will be to my benefit. I'll assist her, then I'll make her my wife." "Hello, dear neighbor, I am pleased you have come. How may I assist you?" he called. "Kind neighbor," Beth answered, "I have come to ask you if I may buy a plow and horse from you." "Purchase, dear Beth? Why, I don't want any payment. I only want friendship." "I beg you, become my wife, and anything that is mine is yours," said the landowner. "That is indeed a generous offer, but I'm afraid I cannot accept. I do not wish to marry again. I only wish to buy what I need," said Beth. The landowner thought for a moment. He didn't want to sell Beth what she needed. He wanted to convince her to become his wife, even if she didn't want to. Do you remember the landowner's other attribute? He was rigid and greedy, yes, but he was cunning too. And so he thought of a sneaky plan. Here's what he said. I'll tell you what, friend Beth. I'll make a deal with you. For each item that you want from me, I'll tell you a riddle. If you answer the riddle correctly, that item is yours. Conversely, if you're wrong, you marry me and become my wife." The landowner sat back with a greedy smile on his face. He fully anticipated winning his game. There was nothing left to do but proceed with thinking of the trickiest and toughest riddles he could think of. Beth was reluctant. Obviously, the landowner was clever and cunning. Furthermore, she did not want to become his wife. Nevertheless, she was clever and cunning too. Weren't riddles just another kind of problem to solve anyways? And she was a champion problem solver. Besides, she really had no choice. Beth desperately needed those supplies. She would do what he wanted and proceed to extract from him the things that she needed. She took a big breath and said, "Very well, I agree. Let us begin with the plow. Proceed with your riddle." The landowner could barely contain his excitement as he said, "I have in my employ 2 barbers. One has neatly trimmed hair, but the other's is a complete mess. Which of the 2 should I choose to cut my hair, and why?" With amusement, Beth answered, Surely you have more difficult riddles than that, sir. It couldn't be more obvious. Nevertheless, I will answer you. You employ only 2 barbers. As a consequence, each must cut the other's hair. Clearly, then, you must have the barber with the messy hair cut yours, because he is the one who must have cut the nicely trimmed hair of the other barber. The landowner could do nothing. Beth's answer was correct. He had told her to come back the next day, but not until it grew late. He would have a much more difficult riddle for her then. When Beth returned the next day, it was nearly dark, and the landowner was ready for her. As soon as she walked in, he began immediately. Today I have a riddle for you that you will not be able to solve. Consequently, you will not win the horse, and you will become my wife. Beth simply nodded, so the landowner proceeded. Tell me something small enough to fit in your hand, but that will nevertheless fill this room entirely. Beth looked at the landowner blankly. She just stared and stared with her hands in her pockets. Soon the landowner began to smile and rub his hands together happily. Now, dear Beth, he laughed, you shall become my wife. As Beth stood there with her hands in her pockets and the night got later and the room got darker, she became aware of something. Wait, said Beth, I know the answer. She drew something out of her pocket. Do you know what it was? Well, it was a small candle no bigger than her hand. When Beth sat it down and lit it, the light from the candle filled the room entirely. And that's how Beth solved the second riddle and took her new horse home. Over the years that followed, Beth and her son used the plow and the horse on their farm so they could grow their own food and live happily in their warm, safe house. Eventually, it was time for Daniel to go out and seek his fortune. When he was ready to leave, his mother told him of a dear friend she had known when she was a child. He was a bit of a silly fellow who could always make Beth laugh. He was happy and helpful, and Beth had loved him very much. Beth said to her son, when it's time for you to find a wife, Daniel, look for a woman who's happy and helpful, but maybe just a bit silly, and you will live a long and joyful life with her. Daniel wondered how he would recognize such a girl. But we needn't worry, because Daniel was just as clever as his mother. But that's for another story.